What is a psychological trick you know to really mess with someone? Story 1: Silence. It's a very effective interview technique because as humans, we are conditioned to break silences in conversations. I had a conversation with my former boss, who was kind of a psychopath. He started by saying he needed to ask me a question. Then he made a bunch of statements and then just stopped and was silent. I assumed his question was implied by the statements, so I started to respond to the statements. He cut me off and chastised me for interrupting when he hadn't asked the question yet. Then he did the same thing. Several statements, then silence, then I started to talk and got yelled at. He did this 3 times before finally asking a question. I thought he was absolutely nuts. Later, I learned this is a technique people use to establish dominance. Story 2: I worked with a friend who kept a 12-pack of Mountain Dew under his desk. For a while, I'd sneak extra cans back into the box. Not a lot, and just enough that he was sure he drank more than the box would hold. Story 3: hand them trash in a conversation. Usually, if you reach out with something, the other person will take it, and if they're busy talking to you, they won't pay attention to what you're handing them. I do it sometimes for fun, and the expression I get when they finally look down and realize I just handed them my trash to take care of is great. Story 4. It's not really psychological, but let's say someone is 25 or 30 feet behind me while we're both walking down a hallway. There's a 90-degree corner coming up. I round the corner, then run really quietly so I'm really far ahead of the person behind me, then I walk my normal speed again. When they round the corner, they're surprised to see how far away I am now compared to how normal I was walking. Story 5. I forget the exact study, but basically in an office setting you can tell anyone anything, and as long as it's on an official memo, anywhere between 60–80% will comply. I think in the study they had it as take this memo to an isolated room, and most people just did it. Wild stuff. There has been a rise in employees receiving emails from their boss, telling them to go buy gift cards for Xmas presents or whatever, then to email the codes to the boss so they can hand them out for Xmas. Nigerian princes must be reading the same studies as you. Story 6. My boss handles stress terribly, so in one-on-one, he tends to snap and spend an hour complaining about people. Sometimes people end up getting chewed out or yelled at in a meeting that's supposed to be about their development. When I first began in my department, he noticed me putting on perfume and said his wife wears the same one. It's not anything fancy, just one that's widely known. Every time I go one-on-one with him, I apply the perfume right before. He generally speaks very softly to me and doesn't snap at me like he does with others, and I'm pretty sure it's because he smells me and thinks of his wife. Messed up that it takes that to get a manager to treat you humanely, but it works. Story 7. If you want to really mess with someone, go up to them and ask them, hey, do you ever get that creepy deja vu feeling? Then like a week later wear the same thing and ask them the same question. I've done this to so many people and their reactions are hilarious. Story 8. Point out something that someone does all the time. One of my co-workers would leave the office at the end of the day and forget his headphones. So he'd leave the office and have to run in again to grab them. I told him I noticed he always forgot his headphones, and how he's self-conscious about it and never forgets them anymore. Story 9. When meeting someone for the first time, say, oh, hello again, and shake their hand even if they go for like a high five and transfer it into a handshake. They will not ask for your name or any information. They will just think that you definitely know them from somewhere, and they just forgot. I do this a lot by accident with conversations. I will say, like I was saying blank or again blank or whatever, only to realize several sentences later, after it's awkward to go back and explain, that I said this to someone else entirely several weeks, months ago, and this is the first time I've ever said this thing to this person. When I get excited, my brain forgets things like how time works and other people aren't a hive mind. Story 10. Look distractedly at their nose or some part of their face, then scratch or rub the corresponding part on your own face. They'll supposedly get confused and think they have something on them. This was from the book Mind Control, The Ancient Art of Psychological Warfare by the dubiously named Ha Lung. My emotionally unstable brother bought this book and I had to see what the hell he was actually reading. The author sounds like a nutcase through his writing. Story 11. If you're quartered with someone, you can intentionally choose one word out of the lexicon to mispronounce. Swear up and down that your way is the correct way, and the correct way is actually the wrong but popular version. After months of intentionally mispronouncing the word shrimp, my mother now says scrimp. It's been 2 years and I can't undo this help. That's wild. My father says Walmart instead of Walmart. I tried correcting him 100 times and obviously said Walmart myself, but he was always like, oh, okay, Walmart, and never changed how he said it. Story 12. If you have access to their computer, take a screenshot of their desktop and set that screenshot as their new desktop image, then hide all the icons in a folder. They'll go nuts trying to click the images, but they're just part of the wallpaper. Bonus. Flip the image upside down before setting it to their wallpaper, then set the display orientation to flipped. They'll be convinced their mouse is bored. Another is to set up a script that does something unexpected, like shutting down their computer and replacing an often used desktop shortcuts target to point to it. They click the payroll DexGLS spreadsheet icon and their computer shuts down. Story 13. Not really how to mess with someone, but if you're sitting on a bus or train and don't want someone sitting next to you, don't put your bag on the seat. Someone will ask you to move it so that they can sit down. Instead, as someone walks by, pat the empty seal whilst making direct eye contact with them and smiling. Works 9 out of 10 times, but the one time it doesn't work, good luck. Story 14. Tell someone you want to play rock, paper, scissors. As you're both getting ready to count down, compliment their shirt or something to throw them off and start counting down. Then, you pick rock. When you interrupt someone's concentration during the game, they automatically go to the most recent thing in their head, which will be scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. It works every time until they realize you're f***ing with them. Story 15. I had a friend who would casually eat a slice of American cheese while taking orders at a particularly rude table. Not say anything other than normally asking what they wanted to eat. Bite of cheese. It would immediately make the guy trying to impress his date by being awful to the server totally docile because it was so awkward. My favorite is the slight lean and making a face like you're farting. I only use it to f*** with people. I don't actually fart. It'll derail any conversation. Story 16. Prolonged smiles. It stops people dead in their tracks. I personally love to do it when someone chatting crap. You gaze directly into their eyes so they lock theirs on you in return and then plaster a ginormous grin on your face. Sometimes it directly gives the message you're unimpressed and they stop. If they don't, you continue to maintain eye contact and smile the exact same way. They'll become increasingly uncomfortable and lose their train of thought. It's also good to use at random times. Sometimes I'll just smile for a long time at my friends, and you're able to see them physically writhe in discomfort at it. Smiling in such a way gives people a massive sense of insecurity, no matter who you are, because you feel the spotlight has unexpectedly been turned on you and you don't know why. Story 17. Nursery rhymes. Hum a few bars, stop then start a few bars later, and repeat. If you pick one person and one song for that person, it can be quite annoying, especially if done over a few days or weeks. Had a group of engineer overseers, 3 of them to be exact, that I would always use 3 blind mice every time they got close. Took them about 4 months to finally say, please stop. Story 18. If you turn your head to look at something, people tend to mimic your behavior to see what you are looking at. It's instinctual. So I will look at random emptiness, and if people look at where I am looking, I ask, do you see that? When they say no, I reply, I gotta take my meds, or something similar. Some people have lively reactions. It's fun to f*** with people's heads. Story 19. It's been proven that people will stand in a long queue, even if they have no idea what it is for. People do it all the time at festivals and things. Start a queue with your friends in front of a trash bin or something innocuous. Then everyone just casually walks away after a load of people not in on the joke join the end of the queue. Story 20. I bike commute to and from work. I've found that when drivers rage towards me, nothing gets under people's skin more than not being mad as well. When they yell, swear, honk, etc., all I do is laugh or do the crying pantomime, and it usually sends people through the roof. They hate that I'm having a good time when they are raging. Story 21. When they are talking, glance at something behind them and go back to making eye contact immediately. Pause for a second, then glance at the same spot again, but make some subtle facial expression for a split second, like confused, concerned, intrigued, etc. They'll probably look back if they do ask them what they're looking at before they ask you. Story 22. So my fiancé is from the south, and I am from the north, and went to a Catholic school that absolutely drilled proper grammar into my mind for all time. My fiancé and her twin love to joke about my accent, so I flipped it on them and asked them to pronounce completely mundane words like table, cloth, or dog and make a huge fuss about how they were saying things wrong. At first, they didn't think I was serious, but after about a week I overheard them trying to pronounce those words to each other and figure out how they were saying it wrong. They even asked Google how to pronounce the words properly. After about a month, I told them I was kidding because they were getting deeply concerned with how they speak, and they both work in jobs where they routinely interact socially with a lot of people. Story 23. During an argument, yell out stuff that doesn't make sense. Ask for money back you never gave. Argue about things you kept to yourself. It derails the argument and confuses your opponent whilst they try to deal with arguments that don't make sense. I know this is narcissistic and horrible to do. It was happening to me for months. I could never reason with arguments and they would win. It was a really effective tactic for a logical person like myself. Story 24. The easiest way I know is when walking into an elevator, don't turn around and look at the door. Just stare at the wall in front of you after you hit your button. People get freaked out so easily because you aren't doing what normal people always do, and it messes with their head trying to figure out what you are doing it for. Story 25. When someone comes to you to complain about something at work and your job is to listen, agree, and want to talk about it way too much. I work for the parks and do this to grumpy old men and women who literally come to my office to complain about weeds on a lawn. So I light right up and start babbling about lawn care. I don't take a breath. I tell them that between us, I'm grateful that someone finally cares. Then I tell them about volunteer opportunities and beg them to please come back, and they run out of there never to return. I follow them out of the building talking about turf management. I do this with pesticides too. I really do want to educate people, but the grumpy ones get a volcano of terrifying, kind enthusiasm, just like Leslie Knope. Story 26. I read one on Reddit years ago, and now I use it daily at work. When someone constantly comes to your office or desk to talk and it irritates you, stand up and walk them back to their desk or work area while they talk. They'll instinctively and casually follow you, then sit back at their spot. Then leave the conversation as soon as possible. This turns 10-15-minute conversations into just a few minutes. Story 27. Found this one when I used to play tennis when I was much younger. If your opponent is in the zone, performing well and you're behind, get them to think more about their performance to take them out of the zone. Wow, you're playing really well today. How are you doing that? Their mind starts trying to answer that question and they cannot stay in the zone, so their performance starts to quickly degrade. Not just for sports. I've used this while playing poker too. Does it work 100% of the time? Of course not. But enough. Story 28. I saw on one of these before that if the interlocutor you're talking with is engaged in what you're saying, they'll accept whatever you physically offer them. Like hand them an eraser or maybe a pen. If they don't notice, and just hold it or put it away somewhere near, but don't specifically ask about why you can just keep giving them bigger and bigger crap. Once they realize you're probably handing them an office chair or a computer screen. Story 29. Upon meeting someone new, a friend and I would ask where they were from. Regardless of the answer, we would look at each other with a surprised look, and one of us would ask if they knew John or Kate or any other common name. Obviously, they would ask a last name, and we would struggle with the answer like it was on the tip of our tongue. We would ask more vague questions to assist us with an answer. Kinda brown hair, tall but not too tall, pretty funny, had a girlfriend, boyfriend they always talked about. Once the person said, "Do you mean John, Kate, what's her name?" My friend and I would say, yeah, that's them. Tell me we said hey. Then we would go into an elaborate improv story that made John, Kate, what's her name seem like a raging alcoholic or addict or something terrible. The new person we had just met would give us the most priceless expression. Seemed so funny at the time. I learned two things from this. 1, we probably ruined many a reputation. 2, we would be good psychics. Story 30. This doesn't really mess with someone, but a buddy of mine and I in college would do this thing where we'd eagerly ask someone, without giving any specifics whatsoever, "Hey, name, have you heard that new song on the radio? That one new song? The one that is played all the time? It's all over. It's gotta be on the Billboard Top 100. Every time I turn on the radio, I hear it." We'd just say the same variation of that, really building up some fake suspense until the target would take a random guess at a song name, and we'd enthusiastically respond, "Yes, that's the one. Wow, I can't believe you got it, and on the first try." Every time the person would act like they just won the lottery. Story 31. My Sunday school teacher was an FBI interrogator. This was the early 90s. Among other things, she taught us how to pop someone's eyeball out of their skull. But the one thing that really stuck with the 10-year-old me was that if you really want to make someone uncomfortable when you're talking with them, stare into one of their eyes. Not both. I've used this in professional situations as an adult in both the military and law enforcement. She was right. It makes people squirm. Story 32. My cousin and I do this thing where I'll walk about 50 feet behind him on a busy sidewalk. Once he gets to our victim, he looks at him and says, "Oh, hey, Mike." We don't actually know his name or who he is. They'll stand there confused on why someone just called them Mike and how they know him. Then maybe 20, 60 seconds later, I come walking by and say the same exact thing. It freaks people the fuck out, and when someone's name is actually Mike, the look on their face is priceless. Story 33. I remember one time in 7th grade when some dude tried to bully me. At the time, I didn't know how to react, so my instinctual reaction was to just pretend like I couldn't see or hear him and his friends. This went on for a week before the guy and his friends started to get visibly mad at the fact that they weren't getting the attention they wanted. It went so far that they started to threaten me for ignoring them, and I ended up getting really good reactions out of them. Story 34. Over the course of a month or two, I slowly moved my wife's bedside table away from the bed. I'd move it maybe a quarter inch every few days. When she finally realized what I had been doing, she'd gotten to the point of leaning so far out of bed to reach something on the table that she had to clutch the covers with her other hand to keep from falling out of bed. She didn't appreciate the humor of the situation nearly as much as I did. Story 35. Use positive reinforcement to get someone to like you, which is universally used in relationships TBH. You can also encourage a person to not date or lose interest in another person, like their BF or GF, by simply encouraging the person to work things out with them or over-encouraging their relationship. This works on certain types of people. It's like if you are going to clean your room and your mom tells you to clean it, you suddenly don't feel like cleaning it anymore. Basically, you make their relationship or love interest seem like a chore instead of something they actually want. If you attempt these things, remember it can backfire. Story 36. My friend used the Pavlov's dog trick to manipulate our boss. He was a good boss, but he had a temper that allowed to get the better of him, which he unfortunately took out on my friend. He tried with me only once until he realized I would yell right back. So she started buying his favorite drinks, and each time he came into the office in a bad mood, she would hand him a drink before he had a chance to open his mouth. Her idea was that it would put him in a better mood every time he saw her because he would think he was getting a drink. And it worked. He stopped taking his anger out on her because he was too busy drinking his soda and thanking her for spending her money on him. When we left, we told his wife, who is a psychologist, she thought it was the funniest damn thing she had ever heard. Edited to add, anytime she didn't have a drink, when he came in a bad mood, he wouldn't get angry, but would instead look expectant at her, and when he wouldn't get a drink, he would walk away confused. That's how we started figuring out that it was working. Story 37. Buy up all the housing and rent it to young people while raising the rent profoundly faster than wages are rising. Then when they start complaining, call them lazy and useless and harass them about why they haven't bought a house yet. Meanwhile, pollute the out of the atmosphere to the point that it destabilizes the climate, causing extreme weather events. Then, when the younger generation realizes it and tries to stop it from happening, deny it's happening at all, no matter how blatantly obvious it is. Story 38. When someone is mad, frustrated, aggressive, or otherwise upset with you, offer them an emotion. For example, in retail, when a customer is confronting staff about something beyond their control, they could say something along the lines of, "I hear that you came all the way here for product X only to find we were out of stock. I imagine that must be very frustrating." This gives a chance to show you are listening by reflecting on your understanding of the problem and its impact on them. It also gives them a chance to process their emotions without taking them out on you. Even if you guess the wrong emotion, people tend to appreciate the attempt to understand their perspective and will often take a step back, figure out their feelings, and tell you the correct emotion. This can diffuse things really quickly, and I've used it a lot in service positions. It can also be really fun to watch someone who came in itching for a fight calm down and work with you when they want to stay mad but can't because you're treating them right. Kill them with kindness. Story 39. Personal space. At one time in my life, I worked as a teacher. One afternoon, the father of one of my students stopped in my classroom to speak with me about his son. This man was a head taller than I and probably had about 50 lbs over me. He wanted some things worked out for his son. Evidently, this man was accustomed to using his size to intimidate people. I don't think he was doing this consciously, and I did not get any sense that he was or would be aggressive. I think it may have been a subconsciously learned behavior. During the course of the discussion, he kept moving into my personal space. I would step back, and within a few minutes, had managed to back me across the length of my classroom, at which point I realized this was happening. So, I decided to start moving toward him into his personal space. By doing so, I caused him to step back. I kept pressing forward, and before I knew it, we had moved back across the classroom. The interesting thing was how the dynamics of the conversation changed when I started moving into his space. By the end of the conversation, he accepted what I had to say and didn't push any further regarding his requests.